Hi everyone, thanks for coming to this session. I know it's the last one of the day for you and that I'm standing between you and happy hour, so I will try to keep this as concise as I possibly can since I know you've already had a long day. And I wanted to start this session off with a minor poll. How many of you in here are project managers? Wow, okay, good amount. How many of you are product managers? Slightly fewer. So I thought I'd start and follow that poll by telling you how I became an accidental product manager pretty early in my career. I was a recent MSc graduate. I had just gotten my master's degree and I was working for a small digital agency in London, and I was hired to manage a B2B newsletter which basically featured interviews with mobile app developers and business leaders, and it was sent via newsletter to subscribers every week, and I was tasked with making sure the video was embedded in the CMS correctly, with growing the newsletter subscribers, working with engineering and our product owner. And so when I was talking to the CEO of the digital agency about what my title should be, I thought that digital strategist would sum up well what I was doing. And he gave it a minute of thought and then said, I think you're actually a product manager because AppBeat, the newsletter, is the product, and so you're gonna manage it. And I said, sure, I'll do that. And so if you're a product manager, I hope you had a more linear progression into the field than I did. But actually, when I talk to product managers and project managers, one of the things they have in common is that those are two roles that people don't necessarily go to college for or think they want to do when they grow up. Those are two roles that you often find yourself in out of nowhere. And so today we're going to talk through the value that each of those roles brings to an organization and make a case for why you should really keep them separate, especially if you're in a position to hire someone for your own business. So the good news about project and product management is that they are very in demand across organizations of all types. Harvard and Cornell are among the business schools that have added product management curriculums to their MBA programs, and that really is to meet demand from students for education about product management. It's one of the most highly sought after jobs in the Valley, and it can be a great launch pad to starting your own business one day. The Project Management Institute also predicts that 88 million people will need to be in project management roles by 2027. And job growth for both of these roles is above average. But that still leaves a question, a big question. What is the difference between project and product management? This is something that's important to clear up because the terms are often conflated and they're often used synonymously when there is a lot of nuance between them. And this is especially true in small businesses that tend to have minimal time, resources, and maybe even candidates to look at for these positions. It's natural that employees in small businesses wear more hats and do more with less. And so it's not unheard of for one person to serve as both the product and the project manager, whether that's intentional or not. But despite the overlap between these two jobs, they serve distinctly different business functions, and that's why it's important to keep them separate. They are also both very time-intensive, demanding roles in their own unique ways. So when you're expected to do both at once, you usually feel a lot like this. You're always drowning, you can't come up for air, and you're reaching out your hand for help with no end in sight because everybody is looking to you to drive the project or product, and you don't subsequently feel like you have anybody that you can reach out to be your lifeline. So this is a big problem, but we'll solve it today by covering a few things. We will start with the definitions of project versus product management. We'll move into the key business functions that each role serves. We'll look at frameworks for project versus product management. We'll cover the areas of overlap between these two positions, and we'll conclude with how to know if your business needs a project or product manager. I'll start by telling a little bit about myself. My name's Lauren Maffeo. I'm a senior content analyst at GetApp, which is a Gartner company, and I specialize in covering trends in cloud project management software for small and mid-sized businesses. Prior to my work at GetApp, I was in the marketing team at AHA, which is a product roadmap software company based in Silicon Valley. And so between those two positions, there's been a good amount of information shared about what works well, especially if you're in a position to hire a product or a project manager to help scale your growing business. Let's start by defining what a project is. It's a plan with a series of activities that has a defined outcome and a fixed start and end date. And that project is complete when the outcome is accomplished. So on that end, project management applies knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to an initiative with a fixed start and end date. Project management is multidisciplinary in the sense that the project managers lead their own internal teams to manage the project process, and they also manage stakeholders both within and outside their organizations. Project management is also budget bound because project managers are responsible for delivering each project and each phase of it on time and under budget, and it's time sensitive. All projects have life cycles with fixed start and end dates. And this is different from product management in a few key ways. So we'll start by putting projects in contrast to what a product is. A product is what you provide to a group of users, and that is very broad. It can be anything from a physical phone that you hold in your hand, it can be a software application like Asana, or it can be a service that you deliver. So at Gartner, the company that I work for, we are a research and advisory firm, and we largely specialize in giving IT and technology research to clients in businesses of all sizes. And so for our organization, the research that we provide is our product. And on that note, product management is a few things as well. It's cross-functional. So product managers are going to work with engineering, marketing, UX, and other teams in the org to bring that product to market. It's revenue bound. So a product is always going to have two key goals: high user adoption and revenue growth. And those are the two key goals because products are ongoing. Their life cycle is continuous and it's not bound by dates. So if you take nothing away from that section, remember that this is the key distinction between projects versus products. Projects are temporary and products are ongoing. And I really like this quote from Pam Johnson, who's a principal systems engineer at Digital Globe, because I think this captures the essence of the two roles really well. Product managers drive the vision and project managers drive the reality. So on that note, project management answers the how. That's because it's historically an IT function in most organizations, and project management really has to own the execution and the day-to-day delivery. And the contrast is that product management answers the why. So product management is historically a business function that actually has its root in brand marketing. And that's because product management is a role that really sits closely to the customer. And as a result of that, as a result of figuring out what the customers want and then working with your internal team to bring a revenue generating product to market, product managers can't care as much about the execution. They can't be dictating to the dev team exactly how to do their job because their key focus is acting as a liaison between the consumer and their internal teams to build the product. So that brings us over to project management frameworks. And there's a lot that could be discussed here. The main thing is that there are overlapping phases within project management frameworks. They are sequential, and there is a handoff between those phases. Those phases, though, are open to nuance, and they're going to vary based on a lot of different variables, depending on your company, the methodology you're using, what the project is, and what the due dates are. And so there are many methodologies that you could use to bring projects to life. They range from waterfall and Scrum to Kanban, and those are just three of several different methods you could use, and there is a lot of nuance there in terms of how project management is practiced. And the main thing that all of those have in common is that risk should decrease. So your project risk should be the greatest at the start of its life cycle, and then it should decrease as the project gets closer to the end of its life cycle and the end of its completion. And you're going to have three key constraints whenever you're practicing project management. So the three constraints that you see up here are known as the triple constraints or the iron triangle. And within project management, regardless of what kind of project you're working on, almost any project is going to have constraints that roll up to these three. So the first constraint that you're going to deal with is time. All projects have a deadline for delivery. And so if you reduce your project's time, you are either going to need to increase its cost or reduce its scope. And the main question you're going to want to answer here is how long will it take team members to complete certain tasks? Because if you make an estimation at the start of the life cycle that turns out to be incorrect during the execution, you've got to reverse course, and that is going to have a corresponding effect on your project's cost and also its scope. Just like having a finite deadline for delivery, all projects will have finite cost. And so if you reduce your project's cost, you'll need to reduce its scope or increase its time. And your core question as it relates to cost is going to be, can we cut costs throughout the life cycle? The scope is the toughest constraint to get right, because if you increase a project's scope, you'll need to either increase cost or time. And that really leads to your biggest question during the life cycle, which is which resources do we need to deliver the project on time and under budget? And that is in contrast to product management frameworks. Unlike in project management, product management phases don't overlap. The phases are sequential, but there isn't the handoff between those phases as there is with project management. There's also not as much nuance, so you can use many different methodologies to manage your projects, but every product goes through the same life cycle. So an easy example is thinking about your iPhone and how every year or two there's a new product in the market that Apple wants you to buy, and those phones are all separate products, but they are going through that same product life cycle, and they will continue to do so until the product itself dies and or is no longer in market. Now this is where the overlap starts, because product management is going to have multiple projects. Each product will have several projects throughout its life cycle, and all of those projects are going to have the fixed start and end dates, and they're going to have their own methodologies, but ultimately they're going to roll up to a product that is going to be ongoing. And this really relates to what AHA was trying to do when AHA came to market. So when you think about the product management constraints, you are not starting with the organization in mind, you're ideally starting with your consumer. So in the case of AHA, the product roadmap software company I worked for, AHA was brought to market with a very specific goal in mind. The CEO had been a head of product for over 2 decades and had a pretty strong sense of what the pain points of the job were. So he and his co-founder decided to build AHA to solve the issues of setting product strategy and managing the nuances of roadmaps. And that started with a really clear sense of what made product managers struggle in their jobs. Then it became a question of what he and his co-founder could build in order to refine or at least help solve that struggle. And then it became an issue of bringing those problems to the organization and saying, how can we deliver what our customers need? And so again, it's a customer-facing role because you have to understand what their issues are first before you can go to your organization and ask them to start executing on what you're asking. And AHA is also a really interesting case story in this regard because everybody on their customer success team is required to have been a product manager before, and that's because they place a really key emphasis on having the customer success team understand those pain points and then communicate those to the dev team so that they can continue to iterate the product. We did share that there are several areas of overlap between these two positions, and so I think it's worth going into those a bit more before we get into the reasons why they should be kept apart, because there are a lot of ways that both roles bring value to a team and to a company. Project and product managers both set the team direction and really own it. They create, communicate, and manage deliverables for both projects and products. They make final decisions after they've collected, prioritized, and answered feedback. They also liaise with and report to stakeholders that are within and outside of their organizations. Project and product managers also know the true costs of what they're working on. Those costs differ a little bit. Project managers should know the capital investments. So if they're in a meeting with senior stakeholders and a stakeholder asks how expensive a project is or how over or under budget a project is at any given time, the project manager really should be able to answer those questions. And by contrast, the product managers should know how much it's costing to support operations. And both roles know that time is a bigger cost than money for their teams, because if they're not meeting their deadlines and bringing projects or products to market on time, that's a bigger risk than if they run over budget, especially because those two have such a strong correlation to each other in both project management and product management. If you are a project or a product manager, your job is also to ask annoying questions. You're probably the wet blanket in the room that is asking why people are doing certain things, and that really starts with choosing people over process. So project and product managers are both most successful in their roles when they can explain iterative development to stakeholders, especially stakeholders that don't have that technical background. Project and product managers also both set expectations early for their teams and stakeholders, and they communicate with the right people at the right stage of each process. So that involves bringing operations and people into maybe stand-ups at the right time, and so they have a strong sense of the people side of managing projects and products, because those are what accounts for a lot of the nuance and unpredictability in both of these positions. And to that end, as mentioned, you are going to have to ask annoying questions regardless of which role you have. If you're in a meeting, you have to be asking, why are we building this? How does this sprint achieve the business strategy? Do we really need 50 steps in this workflow? If we don't, which steps can we remove? And how will these changes impact our team members if we do refine the workflow? These are all questions that you should be asking your team members when they make feature requests, for example, and you should be asking your stakeholders these questions as well, because you've really got to have a clear goal and a clear sense of how those requests will impact the project or product, and then you've got to execute on that. And project managers and product managers are both positions that are highly rooted in business strategy. And this sounds counterintuitive because I mentioned earlier that project management is historically an IT role, but we've seen project management as a discipline change pretty rapidly, even within the last 5 to 10 years. And a lot of that has to do with the increasing pace of business. Businesses are expected to do more in faster periods of time, in large part because they've been expected to bring a lot of their services online, and especially on mobile, at a more rapid rate. And so a lot of the old practices of project management were just not keeping pace with the change that was required of them. And so as a result, we've seen project management methodologies like Agile become much more highly adopted in business environments. And to that point, the Project Management Institute did research which found that 81% of program managers at U.S. government agencies said that strong support from at least one executive level sponsor had a high impact on project success. And that really hits home how important it is for, even if you have a project that lives in engineering and is rooted in that world, you still need support from the business side of things, because without that executive level sponsor, your chances of delivering on time and under budget decrease. The challenge is that the entrepreneurial skills that are required in both roles project management hasn't really caught up to product management. So for years now, product managers have been called mini CEOs. If you think about how cross-functional and how strategic the role is, there's a reason why so many product managers at Google go on to found their own companies, because that experience of setting the strategy for a product, executing on it throughout the life cycle, and working with cross-functional teams like marketing and engineering, which have such conflicting priorities, it's actually perfect training ground for being a CEO. So that is actually a prime position if you are in a position to start your own company, or if you just want to have a strategy position in a company. But research from CEB, which is also owned by Gartner, shows that under 30% of project managers have entrepreneurial skills. Now, the nature of entrepreneurial skills is nuanced and debatable, but I think it really speaks to the heart of that position, which is that project management is about the execution rather than the strategy. And so that high attention to detail that makes a project manager excel at their job might not necessarily be the best person to set the strategy. So then that gets into the question of which of these roles, if they're so similar, do you need for your own business? And that really starts with asking yourself two questions. The first is what your business really needs. If you need someone to own your day-to-day deliverables, you should be looking at a project manager and bringing a project manager on to manage that day-to-day and report out to you. If you're looking for someone to own your roadmap strategy, you want to look at bringing on a product manager. So let's say you are a small business owner and you are developing a software product and you have the idea for a roadmap and it's in the early stages of development, but you really need someone to own it and continue to grow it throughout the life cycle. If that's your case, you're going to be wanting to look for a product manager. The second question you need to ask is what your core business function is. If you're primarily an engineering company, you do want to be looking more on the project side of things and you want to be hiring for a project manager. If you feel like you are a product company at heart, then you're going to be looking to hire a product manager. The truth is that most people don't excel at both positions. We've shared in this presentation that product management fulfills a different business function than project management, and there is a tendency for businesses to try collapsing these roles into one. I've talked to many product managers who also were responsible for owning projects, in part because that is an aspect of their position, but also because their businesses didn't understand the nuanced value that each role brings to the table. And the challenge is that they do require such different skill sets that most people will not excel at both. And if you collapse project management and product management into one role, the odds are that product management won't get the attention that it deserves. And that could be a big issue if setting strategy and driving a revenue-driven roadmap is what your key business priority is. Jordan Bergtraum is a freelance head of product, and he wanted to see what his own team members were doing. So he ran an informal survey and said that when his team members were responsible for both product and project management, there was an 80-20 split in favor of project management. And that sounds drastic, but when you think about the competing priorities of the day-to-day deliverables versus the high-level strategic execution, it's almost impossible for someone to truly deliver on both of those in a day-to-day environment and do really well. And typically what happens is that you're going to be reactive to the needs of a project, and when you are in that environment, strategy can seem like an afterthought when it requires an enormous amount of time. And then that really leads to the question of what to do with your roadmap, because if you are only able to devote 20% of your time to product management, the likelihood that you'll create a revenue-moving roadmap goes down. But regardless of who you hire and what you need, you want to look for a few key things that both excellent project managers and product managers should have in common. The best project and product managers do a few things really well. They lead with empathy, both for their teams and their customers. They are good at dividing work, so they put people where they will excel and then help drive everybody to the end of their life cycles, however long they are. And they ask more questions than answers. And this is a key thing to point out because both project and product managers have to own the final outcomes, but they also have to make informed decisions based on what everyone's telling them. And both roles have a lot of noise in their ears because you're getting advice from customers and marketers and dev team members. And so there are a lot of conflicting priorities because everybody has their own ideas about what's going to work. And your job is to not only execute on those, but to listen to all of that feedback, figure out what's going to work well for your project and your product goals, and then execute on it from there. And so regardless of whether your business needs a project or a product manager, you always want to be looking for people who can do those three things exceptionally well. And with that, you'll be able to drive your projects forward and see yourself in a new way of success. Thank you.